Rain lashed against the leaded glass of Halloway Manor, drowning out the frantic whispers of a family on the brink of ruin. But the silence that followed the heavy knock on the front door was far louder than the storm. On the night of October 14th, 1888, the Halloway family sat down for a dinner intended to save their crumbling reputation. Instead, the double doors were thrown open by Samuel Sterling, the Duke of Ashcroft, a man known in London society only for his cruelty and his calculating silence. He didn't come to eat, he came to destroy. But when he laughed at her father's desperation, he didn't expect the quiet girl in the faded blue dress to stand up. What Beatrice Halloway said next didn't just silence a duke, it started a war that would burn all the way to London. The dining room of Halloway Manor smelled of damp wool and desperate ambition. It was a cold Tuesday evening in Yorkshire, the kind of night where the fog rolled off the moors and seeped through the cracks of the window frames, chilling the bones of anyone foolish enough to be awake. Inside, the Halloway family was staging a play. The audience was meant to be Mr. Timothy Gentry, a wealthy textile merchant from Leeds who was currently delayed by the storm. The intended prize was the hand of Miss Cecily Halloway, the family's golden child, whose beauty was the only asset Baron Alaric Halloway had left to trade. Beatrice Halloway, 2 years older than Cecily and decidedly less marketable in her stepmother's eyes, adjusted the silverware. The fork was polished, but if one looked closely, the silver plating was wearing thin at the handle, revealing the base brass beneath. It was a perfect metaphor for their lives. "Stop fidgeting, Beatrice," Lady Catherine hissed, smoothing the silk of her own gown, a dress that had been remade 3 times to hide its age. "When Mr. Gentry arrives, you are to speak only when spoken to. We need him to focus on Cecily. Your sharp tongue is not required tonight." "I hardly think my tongue will be the issue if the roof leaks into the soup, stepmother," Beatrice said, her voice low. She didn't say it with malice, but with a tired practicality. Beatrice was 22, past the prime marriageable age by society's cruel standards, and she had spent the last 4 years managing the household ledgers that her father refused to look at. She knew exactly how much red ink was bleeding across the pages. Baron Alaric Halloway sat at the head of the table, his hand shaking slightly as he reached for his wine glass. He was a man hollowed out by gambling debts and bad investments. "He will come," Alaric muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Gentry will come. He must. The loan from the Ashcroft estate is due on the 1st of the month. If we do not secure a settlement—" He trailed off. They all knew the rumor. The old Duke of Ashcroft had been a lenient, if distant, creditor. But the old Duke was dead. His son, Samuel Sterling, had returned from the continent 6 months ago to claim his title. The tabloids called him the Wolf of Westminster. They said he had ice water in his veins. They said he was evicting tenants who had lived on Ashcroft land for generations. None, simply because they missed a payment by a day. "We are not tenants," Lady Catherine sniffed, though her eyes betrayed her fear. "We are gentry. The new Duke wouldn't dare move against a baron. It simply isn't done." "The new Duke does exactly as he pleases," Beatrice said, taking her seat at the far end of the table in the shadows. "I heard he walked out of the Queen's garden party because he found the conversation dull." "Hush!" Alaric snapped. Suddenly, a thunderous boom echoed through the house. Not thunder, but the heavy iron knocker of the front door slamming against the wood. Lady Catherine brightened, pinching her cheeks to bring colour to them. "He's here. Cecily, sit up straight. Alaric, put the wine down." The one remaining servant, an elderly man named Thomas, whose livery was threadbare, shuffled to the door. The family waited in breathless anticipation. They heard the heavy creak of the oak door, the roar of the wind, and then silence. There were no pleasantries exchanged in the hall, no handing over of a wet coat to Thomas, just the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots on the parquet floor, getting louder, closer. The dining room doors didn't open. They were pushed wide with a force that rattled the china. Standing in the threshold was not the portly, smiling Mr. Timothy Gentry. The man framed by the doorway was tall, his broad shoulders filling the space. He wore a riding coat of dark wool that was soaked through, the water dripping onto the floor. His hair was black as the night outside, plastered to his forehead by the rain, framing a face of sharp, aristocratic angles and eyes that burned with a cold, terrifying intelligence. It was Samuel Sterling, the Duke of Ashcroft. He didn't bow, he didn't apologize for the intrusion. He simply peeled off his wet gloves, one finger at a time, his gaze sweeping over the meager spread on the table, the roasted chicken that was too small, the flowers that were wilting, the terror in Alaric Halloway's eyes. "Good evening, Alaric," the Duke said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth as velvet and just as suffocating. "I trust I'm not interrupting anything valuable." Baron Halloway turned a shade of grey that Beatrice hadn't thought humanly possible. He scrambled to stand, knocking over his chair in the process. Your Grace," Alaric stammered. We were not expecting you. We were expecting a savior?" Samuel Sterling finished the sentence, stepping into the room. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mr. Gentry will not be coming. His carriage lost a wheel 3 miles back. I passed him on the road." He looked rather relieved to turn back to the inn, actually. Lady Catherine let out a strangled gasp. Cecily looked on the verge of tears. "Please," Alaric gestured frantically to Thomas, who was hovering in the background, terrified. "Thomas, set a place for His Grace. Please sit, Your Grace. Partake of our hospitality." Samuel looked at the empty chair at the head of the table, opposite Alaric, and then at the chicken. A faint, cruel smirk touched his lips. "Hospitality. Is that what we are calling it?" He sat. He didn't remove his wet coat. He sat with the arrogance of a man who owned the chair, the table, and the floor beneath it. Technically, Beatrice realized with a sick lurch of her stomach, he probably did. Thomas hurriedly placed a plate before the Duke. The silence was agonizing. The only sound was the rain and the clicking of the Duke's signet ring against the mahogany table. "To what do we owe this honor?" Lady Catherine asked, her voice trembling, trying to summon her social graces. Samuel ignored her. His eyes were locked on Alaric. "It is the 14th, Alaric." "Yes," Alaric swallowed. "Yes, it is. The payment is not due until the 1st. "The interest," Samuel corrected softly. "The principal of the loan my father foolishly extended to you was due 3 years ago. You have been paying interest only. However, I have reviewed the ledger. There is a clause, Clause 4, Section B. In the event of the creditor's passing, the heir may call in the full debt immediately if the estate's solvency is in question." "But your estate is the richest in England," Beatrice spoke up. Every head turned to her. Beatrice hadn't meant to speak, but the injustice of it burned her throat. Samuel Sterling turned his head slowly, his grey eyes landing on her for the first time. It felt like being scanned by a predator. "And who might this be?" Samuel asked, not looking away from her. "My daughter, Beatrice," Alaric said quickly. "She apologizes. She knows nothing of business." "On the contrary," Samuel said, picking up a fork and inspecting it with disdain. "She seems to know that I don't need the money, which makes it all the more tragic for you, Alaric, because it means I am doing this for sport." He dropped the fork. It clattered loudly against the china. "I am calling in the debt, Alaric. Tonight. £50,000, or I foreclose on Halloway Manor at dawn." Cecily burst into tears. Lady Catherine gripped the table until her knuckles were white. Alaric looked like he was having a stroke. "Your Grace, please," Alaric begged, all dignity gone. I have irons in the fire. This marriage for Cecily. If you give me a month." "I don't trade in ifs, Alaric, and I certainly don't trade in the selling of daughters to textile merchants to cover your incompetence at the baccarat table." The insult hung in the air, gross and heavy. He was mocking them. He was enjoying it. He was sitting in their home, eating their food or refusing to, and watching them bleed. Beatrice felt a heat rise in her chest that she couldn't suppress. It was the heat of years of watching her father cower, years of patching dresses, years of holding her head high in a town that laughed at them. She looked at this man, this incredibly handsome, incredibly cruel man, and she decided she didn't care if he was a duke. He was a bully. She stood up. "Sit down, Beatrice," her father hissed. "No," Beatrice said clearly. Samuel shifted his gaze back to her. He looked mildly amused, like a lion watching a mouse squeak. "Do you have something to add, Miss Halloway? Perhaps a plea for mercy? Tears seem to be your sister's department." Beatrice walked to the edge of the table. She gripped the back of her chair. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady steel. "You speak of incompetence, Your Grace," Beatrice said, her voice ringing through the dining room. "You speak of my father's gambling. But is it not a form of gambling to come into a stranger's home, dripping wet, destroying the carpet, and insulting the host?" "Beatrice!" Lady Catherine shrieked. "Silence!" Beatrice snapped at her stepmother, never taking her eyes off the Duke. Samuel's amusement faded, replaced by a sharp focus. He leaned forward. "Careful, little girl. You are speaking to your landlord." "I am speaking to a man," Beatrice countered, "a man who clearly has so little joy in his vast, wealthy life that he must ride through a storm to terrorize a family that poses no threat to him. You say you want the money? You know we don't have it. You say you want the house? Take it. It's drafty. The roof leaks, and the chimneys smoke. But you didn't come for the house, did you?" She leaned in, matching his intensity. "You came because you are bored, Your Grace. You are a small, sad man playing God because you have nothing else to do. You may own the roof over our heads. You may own the paper my father signed. But you do not own the air we breathe, and you certainly do not own the dignity required to sit at this table." The room went deathly silent. Alaric had his head in his hands. Samuel stared at her. His face was unreadable. For 10 agonizing seconds, no one breathed. Then the Duke of Ashcroft did something no one expected. He laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was a genuine, surprised bark of laughter. He sat back in his chair, looking at Beatrice with a sudden, terrifying appreciation. "Dignity," he repeated the word, tasting it. "You think you have dignity, Miss Halloway?" "I know I do," she said. "Because I am not the one kicking a dog when it is down." Samuel stood up. He towered over her, but Beatrice didn't flinch. He walked slowly around the table until he was standing right in front of her. He smelled of rain, leather, and expensive tobacco. "You are right," he said softly, so only she could hear. "I am bored. Unspeakably so." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded document, the deed to Halloway Manor. He held it up between them. "So let's make it interesting. I won't foreclose tomorrow." Alaric let out a sob of relief. "Under one condition," Samuel added, his eyes locking onto Beatrice's. "What condition?" she asked warily. "You," Samuel said. "You come to Ashcroft Manor." "To work." "As a governess?" Beatrice asked, confused. "No," Samuel smirked. "As my personal secretary. You seem to know about ledgers. You seem to have a spine. I am surrounded by sycophants who tell me what I want to hear. I need someone to organize my chaotic affairs, who isn't afraid to tell me I'm a sad, small man." He tossed the deed onto the table. "1 month, Miss Halloway. You work for me for 1 month. You organize the Ashcroft archives. If you survive the month without quitting, and without me firing you, I wipe your father's debt clean, completely." "And if I fail?" Beatrice whispered. "Then I take everything," Samuel said darkly. "The house, the land, and you leave Yorkshire forever." He extended a hand. "Do we have a deal?" Beatrice looked at her father, who was nodding pathetically. She looked at the deed. Then she looked at the Duke's hand. It was a deal with the devil, but she was the only one in the room who knew how to dance with fire. She took his hand. His grip was warm and firm. "I'll see you at dawn, Your Grace," she said. "Don't be late." Dawn arrived with a bruised, purple sky, offering no warmth to match the chill in Beatrice Halloway's stomach. She had packed her meager belongings into a single leather trunk, one that had belonged to her mother, and stood by the front gate of Halloway Manor long before the sun crested the hills. When the Ashcroft carriage arrived, it wasn't a servant's cart. It was a sleek black phaeton bearing the ducal crest, a silver falcon clutching a thorny branch. The driver, a silent man named Elias with a face like granite, loaded her trunk without a word. As they drove away, Beatrice didn't look back at her crumbling family home. She looked forward, towards the towering silhouette of Ashcroft Manor dominating the distant ridge. It was vastly larger than Halloway Manor, a sprawling testament to centuries of accumulated wealth and power. It was magnificent, and it was terrifying. Upon arrival, she was not greeted by the Duke. Instead, she was met in the cavernous marble foyer by Mrs. Eleanor Croft, the housekeeper. Mrs. Croft was a woman draped in severe black bombazine, carrying a ring of keys that jingled like the chains of a jailer. Her appraisal of Beatrice was swift and lacking any warmth. His Grace did not inform me he was hiring female assistants for the archives, Mrs. Croft said, her nose twitching slightly, as if she smelled something unpleasant. We have not had a woman working in the East Wing since the late Duchess passed. I am here on a temporary contract, Mrs. Croft, Beatrice said, keeping her spine stiff. I assure you, I intend to be neither a burden nor a distraction. See that you aren't. The Duke does not tolerate errors. Follow me. Beatrice was led past drawing rooms adorned with priceless tapestries and gilded furniture, through corridors lined with the stern portraits of sterling ancestors, all men with the same hard jaw and calculating eyes as Samuel. Finally, they reached the East Wing. Mrs. Croft unlocked a heavy oak door and pushed it open. The archives, Mrs. Croft announced before turning on her heel and leaving Beatrice alone. Beatrice stepped inside and gasped. The room was immense, a 2-story library with towering shelves reached by spiral staircases. But it wasn't the scale that shocked her. It was the chaos. It looked as though a whirlwind had ripped through centuries of history. Crates overflowed with yellowing parchment. Leather-bound ledgers were stacked in leaning towers that threatened to topple. Loose papers carpeted the floor like autumn leaves. Deeds, correspondence, architectural plans, all jumbled together without rhyme or reason. In the center of the maelstrom sat a grand mahogany desk, buried under mountains of documents, and behind the desk sat Samuel Sterling. He was in his shirt sleeves, waistcoat unbuttoned, his dark hair mussed, as if he had been running his hands through it in frustration. He looked up as she entered, his grey eyes sharp with exhaustion and irritation. "You're late," he snapped, glancing at a grandfather clock that had stopped working years ago. "I arrived precisely at 8, Your Grace." "As instructed," Beatrice replied, refusing to be cowed. She surveyed the room, placing her hands on her hips. "Good heavens! Did you let wild badgers loose in here?" Samuel leaned back in his chair, a flicker of that same surprised amusement from the night before crossing his face. My late father was not a man of systems. He preferred to keep things at hand, which apparently meant throwing everything onto the floor for 30 years. He stood up and kicked a crate full of scrolls toward her. It slid across the dusty floor, stopping at her feet. "Your first task. The land deeds for the northern tenant farms. I need them categorized by acreage and yield for the last decade. I intend to raise rents next month, and I need to know who is underperforming." Beatrice looked at the crate, then at the chaotic room. "Your Grace, one does not simply categorize deeds when they are mixed in with what appears to be a recipe for pheasant stew and a letter from the bishop dated 1842. She bent down and plucked a piece of paper from the crate. "See? My dearest Alaric, regarding the wager on the chestnut mare." She stopped, realizing it was a letter to her own father years ago. Samuel watched her. "If the task is too difficult, Miss Halloway, the door is behind you. I believe my carriage is still outside. It can take you back to poverty before luncheon." The threat stung, as it was meant to. but it also ignited that familiar heat in her chest. "I didn't say it was difficult," Beatrice said coldly, dropping the letter back into the crate. "I said your method is inefficient. If you want this done, you will let me do it my way. I need this section cleared." She pointed to a large oak table near the window, covered in dusty architectural models. "I need boxes, labels, and I need you out of my way." Samuel raised an eyebrow. No one ordered him out of his own rooms. "You need me out of your way?" "Unless you intend to help carry these ledgers, yes. You are looming, Your Grace. It is counterproductive." For a moment, she thought he might throw her out then and there. His jaw tightened. Then he gave a short, dismissive wave of his hand. "Fine. Croft will bring you supplies. You have until sunset to show me progress on the northern deeds. If I see chaos tomorrow morning, you are finished." He grabbed his coat and strode towards the door. As he passed her, he paused, leaning in close. "Don't disappoint me, Beatrice. I do so hate winning a bet too easily." 3 days passed in a blur of dust, ink, and aching muscles. Beatrice worked from dawn until long after dusk, fueled by stubbornness and pots of strong tea provided by a grudging Mrs. Croft. She attacked the archives like a general commanding a battlefield. She cleared the large oak table and created zones: financials, correspondence, legal deeds, and a mounting pile she labeled miscellaneous nonsense. The sheer volume of information about the Sterling family was staggering. They owned half the county. They had money invested in shipping lines in Liverpool, cotton mills in Manchester, and railways in America. The wealth was obscene. Yet, as Beatrice organized the ledgers, a strange pattern began to emerge. The chaos wasn't just incompetence. It felt deliberate. On the afternoon of the 4th day, while the Duke was out riding, inspecting the very tenants he planned to squeeze for more rent, Beatrice found the red ledger. It was shoved behind a row of dull agricultural reports from the 1860s on a high shelf she had to climb a ladder to reach. Unlike the other dusty, mildewed books, this one was wrapped in oilcloth and relatively preserved. She brought it down to her desk. It was a private account book belonging to the late Duke, Samuel's father. The entries were sparse, written in a shaky, hurried hand. Most of it was standard: gambling losses, payments to tailors, purchases of fine wines. But starting 5 years ago, a recurring entry appeared every month on the 15th. £200. C. Vaughan. Matters in Cornwall. £200 a month was a small fortune, enough to support a family in luxury for a year. And it continued like clockwork until 6 months ago, the exact month the old Duke died in a riding accident and Samuel returned from Europe. Beatrice frowned. Who was C. Vaughan? And what matters in Cornwall required such exorbitant hush money? Further down the page, dated just 2 days before the old Duke's death, was a frantic entry, pressed so hard the ink bled through the page. Vaughan demands more, says the boy is asking questions, must silence them both. If Samuel finds out, it is ruin, total ruin. Beatrice's heart hammered against her ribs. The boy? What boy? She was so absorbed in the text that she didn't hear the library door open. She didn't hear the soft tread of boots on the Persian rug. A large, warm hand suddenly slammed down onto the open ledger, covering the words. Beatrice jumped violently, nearly knocking over her inkwell. She looked up into the blazing fury of Samuel Sterling's eyes. He wasn't the bored aristocrat now. He was the wolf the tabloids wrote about. His face was inches from hers, his breathing controlled but heavy. "I hired a secretary," Samuel said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "Not a spy." Beatrice tried to pull away, but he leaned in closer, trapping her between her chair and the desk. The scent of the outdoors and cold anger emanated from him. I was just organizing, Your Grace," she stammered, her heart racing. "It was misfiled." "Don't lie to me," he snarled. He snatched the red ledger from under his hand and snapped it shut. "You were reading my father's private journal. That is a breach of contract." "It was with the farm reports," Beatrice argued, finding her courage despite her fear. "And it is full of irregularities. If you want your affairs in order, you cannot ignore massive payments to unknown persons in Cornwall." His eyes widened slightly at the mention of Cornwall. A crack in the armor. "What do you know of Cornwall?" he demanded, grabbing her wrist. His grip was iron, but not painful, just restraining. "Nothing," Beatrice cried. "Only what is written there. That your father was paying someone named Vaughan to keep a secret about a boy." Samuel went very still. He released her wrist as if burned. He stepped back, clutching the ledger tightly. The fury in his eyes dulled into something else. Something that looked strangely like haunted panic. He walked to the fireplace, where a low fire was burning against the damp afternoon. For a horrifying moment, Beatrice thought he was going to throw the book into the flames. Instead, he turned back to her. The arrogant mask was back in place, but it was thinner now. She had seen beneath it. "You are a very foolish girl, Beatrice Halloway," he said, his voice flat. "There are closets in this house you should not open. Skeletons that will not just rattle, but bite." "I am not afraid of skeletons, Your Grace. My own family closet is full of them." "Your family's skeletons are petty debts and cheap wine," Samuel scoffed cruelly. "Mine are different." He walked toward her again, stopping just a foot away. The tension in the room had shifted from anger to an intense, charged awareness of each other. "You wanted a job," Samuel said. "You wanted to save your father. Then stick to the tenant deeds and the grain reports. Forget you ever saw that book. Do you understand?" "Or what?" Beatrice challenged him, breathless. "You'll fire me. Foreclose on my home." Samuel looked at her, and his gaze dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second before snapping back to her eyes. "Or you will find yourself involved in something far more dangerous than poverty," he whispered. "Consider this your only warning. If I catch you digging into my family's past again, I won't just send you home. I will destroy you." He turned and walked out of the archives, taking the red ledger with him, leaving Beatrice alone in the towering silence, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. She knew she should be terrified. She knew she should pack her trunk and flee. But all she could think about was the look in his eyes when he mentioned Cornwall. It wasn't anger. It was pain. And God help her, she wanted to know why. The week following the incident with the red ledger was defined by a suffocating cold war. Samuel Sterling did not fire Beatrice, but he did not speak to her either. He moved through the manor like a ghost, his presence marked only by the slamming of doors and the heavy scent of brandy that lingered in the hallways after midnight. Beatrice kept her head down. She organized the grain yields of 1885. She catalogued the stable expenses. She did exactly as she was told. But her mind was a ferment of questions. The name C. Vaughan haunted her. On a Tuesday night, 2 weeks into her confinement at Ashcroft Manor, insomnia drove Beatrice back to the archives. She told herself she had forgotten her shawl, but in truth, the silence of her small bedroom was maddening. The archives were dim, lit only by the dying embers of the fire and the moonlight spilling through the high windows. Beatrice retrieved her shawl from the back of her chair. As she turned to leave, a gust of wind from a drafty window fluttered the papers on the main desk, the Duke's desk. A single sheet of heavy, cream-colored stationery drifted to the floor. Beatrice hesitated. She knew she should leave it. She knew the penalty for prying. But the handwriting was distinctive, sharp, jagged, and aggressive. It wasn't Samuel's elegant script. She knelt and picked it up. "Lord Ashcroft, your silence is growing tedious. The boy is asking about his father. He has your brother's eyes, Samuel. You cannot hide him in Cornwall forever. The legitimacy of your title hangs by a thread, and I hold the scissors. Meet me at the autumn ball, or I introduce the true Duke to London society. Clement Vaughan." Beatrice's hand flew to her mouth. The room spun. The true Duke. Samuel wasn't just hiding a scandal. He was hiding the rightful heir. If his late older brother, Frederick, who had died in a hunting accident 3 years ago, had secretly married and fathered a son, then Samuel was not the Duke. He was a fraud. He was stealing a child's birthright. I see my security measures are woefully inadequate. The voice came from the shadows of the spiral staircase. Beatrice froze, the letter crumpling in her fist. Samuel descended the stairs slowly. He was wearing a silk dressing gown over his trousers, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked wrecked. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair chaotic, and the arrogance that usually armored him was stripped away, leaving a raw, jagged exhaustion. It fell on the floor, Beatrice whispered, clutching the paper, and you just happened to read it, in the dark. By moonlight, Samuel said, his voice devoid of anger, heavy with a terrible resignation. He reached the bottom of the stairs and walked toward her. Give it to me. Beatrice held the letter out. He took it, his fingers brushing hers. His skin was burning hot. Is it true? She asked, her voice trembling. Is there a child? A rightful heir? Samuel tossed the letter into the fireplace. The flames licked at the paper, consuming the threat in seconds. You think I'm a monster, he said, staring at the fire. You think I'm stealing a child's inheritance to keep my power. I don't know what to think, Beatrice cried. You threaten my father for a debt, yet you sit here drinking yourself to death while blackmailers threaten you. You are a man of contradictions, Samuel. Who is the boy? He turned to look at her. The vulnerability in his eyes was devastating. His name is Leo, Samuel said softly. He is 6 years old, and he is safe. For now. Is he Frederick's son? Yes. Then he is the Duke, Beatrice said, the reality settling in. And you are... I am the man keeping him alive, Samuel snapped, his voice rising. He stepped closer, the firelight casting long shadows across his face. Vaughan doesn't care about Leo's birthright. Vaughan is a gambler and a parasite who married the boy's mother on her deathbed. If Leo is declared Duke, Vaughan becomes his legal guardian. He will drain the estate dry and leave the boy to rot in some boarding school. Or worse. Samuel ran a hand over his face. I am not protecting the title for myself, Beatrice. I hate this title. I hate this house. It is a prison of stone and expectation. But I will be damned if I let a vulture like Clement Vaughan destroy my brother's son. Beatrice stared at him, the pieces clicking into place. The cruelty, the hardness, it was a wall. He was fighting a war on 2 fronts, keeping the estate solvent to pay off Vaughan's blackmail and playing the villain to keep anyone from looking too closely at the family tree. Why didn't you tell anyone? She asked gently. Because there is no proof of the marriage, Samuel admitted, sounding defeated. Frederick married a shopkeeper's daughter in secret. No witnesses, no certificate. Vaughan claims he has the papers, but he won't produce them until I pay. If I go to court, I lose the boy to Vaughan. If I pay, I bleed the estate dry. It is a stalemate. He looked at her, his grey eyes searching hers. And now you know. You hold the weapon that can destroy me. Go on, Beatrice. Run to the papers. Tell them the Duke of Ashcroft is a fraud. You'll be a hero. Beatrice looked at the man standing before her. Not a tyrant, but a guardian pushed to his breaking point. She thought of her own father, weak and foolish, and how she had fought to save him. She recognized the same fight in Samuel. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them. My father owes you £50,000, she said quietly, but you just gave me something worth far more. What is that? The truth. She reached out and, in a moment of boldness that shocked them both, placed her hand on his forearm. I am not going to the papers, Samuel. I am your secretary. It is my job to organize your affairs. And it seems your affairs include dealing with Mr. Clement Vaughan. Samuel looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up to her face. The tension in the air changed. It wasn't the hostile electricity of their first meeting. It was magnetic. For a second, he leaned in, and Beatrice's breath hitched. The smell of brandy and wood smoke filled her senses. "You are playing a dangerous game, Beatrice," he murmured, his voice rough. "I told you," she whispered. "I know how to dance with fire." He didn't kiss her. He pulled back, the mask sliding back into place, though it was less rigid than before. "The autumn ball is in 3 days," he said, his voice steadying. "Vaughan is coming. He intends to make a scene. I need you there." "I have nothing to wear to a ball," she said practically. "Leave that to me," Samuel said. He turned to leave the room, pausing at the door. "And Beatrice?" "Yes, Your Grace?" "Thank you." The Ashcroft Autumn Ball was the apex of the social season in Yorkshire. Carriages lined the driveway for a mile. The great hall, usually so cold and imposing, was transformed by thousands of white candles and garlands of autumn leaves and winter roses. Beatrice stood at the top of the grand staircase, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. On her bed that morning, she had found a box. Inside was not a dress, but a weapon of silk. It was a gown of deep, midnight blue velvet, dark enough to look black in the shadows, but shimmering like a sapphire in the light. It was modest, yet striking, cut to accentuate her waist and the curve of her neck. There were no jewels, just the dress and a pair of long, black gloves. A note had accompanied it. Armor. S. She descended the stairs. The murmur of the crowd below hushed as heads turned. They expected to see a debutante or a visiting duchess. Instead, they saw the impoverished Baron Halloway's spinster daughter, looking like a queen of the night. Alaric Halloway, standing near the punch bowl, dropped his ladle. Lady Catherine looked as though she had swallowed a lemon. But Beatrice only had eyes for one man. Samuel stood at the base of the stairs. He was resplendent in formal evening wear, the sash of his order across his chest. He looked every inch the Duke, powerful, distant, untouchable. But as his eyes met hers, she saw the acknowledgement. They were allies in a room full of enemies. He didn't smile, but he extended his arm as she reached the bottom step. "You look—" He paused, searching for the word. "Formidable." "I feel like an imposter," she confessed under her breath as she took his arm. "Good," he muttered, leading her into the crush of the ballroom. "Then you fit right in. Everyone here is pretending to be something they aren't. Keep your eyes open. Vaughan is here." The next hour was a blur of polite conversation and veiled insults. Beatrice navigated the social waters with a grace she didn't know she possessed. She deflected questions about her employment, "I am assisting His Grace with historical preservation," and ignored the sneers of the local gentry. Around 10 o'clock, the atmosphere shifted. The crowd near the entrance parted like the Red Sea. A man walked in. He was not handsome in the way Samuel was. He was sleek, with oil-slicked hair and a smile that showed too many teeth. He wore a suit that was fashionable but slightly too loud, the mark of new money and bad taste. Clement Vaughan. He didn't wait to be announced. He strode directly toward Samuel, who was standing with Beatrice near the orchestra. "Your Grace," Vaughan boomed, his voice carrying over the music. "So kind of you to host such a lavish event. Spending the inheritance while you still can, eh?" The music faltered. A ripple of whispers tore through the room. Samuel's face went stone cold. "Mr. Vaughan, I wasn't aware you were on the guest list." "Oh, I'm sure it was an oversight," Vaughan laughed, stepping into their personal space. He looked at Beatrice, his eyes raking over her with repulsive familiarity. "And who is this? The new mistress?" "You do have a type, Samuel. Plain and desperate." Beatrice felt Samuel's arm tense beneath her hand. He was ready to strike the man. If he did, the scandal would be immediate. Beatrice stepped forward, interposing herself between the two men. "I am Miss Halloway," she said, her voice clear and carrying perfectly in the quieted hall, "and I am handling His Grace's schedule. If you have business, Mr. Vaughan, you may make an appointment for Tuesday. Currently, the Duke is occupied." Vaughan looked down at her, amused. "A secretary? How quaint." Listen to me, girl. I don't need an appointment. I have a piece of paper in my pocket that says I own this man, and this house, and that title." He turned back to the crowd, raising his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, you all bow to Samuel Sterling. But tell me, Samuel, have you told them about Cornwall? Have you told them about the little boy living in the cottage by the sea?" The silence was deafening. Lady Catherine actually fainted, though no one moved to catch her. Samuel's face was pale, his fists clenched at his sides. He couldn't deny it without lying. He couldn't confirm it without losing everything. Vaughan had checkmated him in the middle of the ballroom. "Cat got your tongue?" Vaughan sneered. He reached into his breast pocket. "Perhaps I should read the marriage certificate to the assembly. I'm sure the local magistrate would be interested to know that the late Duke Frederick—" Stop. It wasn't Samuel who spoke. It was Beatrice. She moved closer to Vaughan, dropping her voice so only he and Samuel could hear. "Pull that paper out, Mr. Vaughan, and I will have you arrested before you finish the first sentence." Vaughan blinked, looking down at her. "Excuse me." "You are a gambler, Mr. Vaughan," Beatrice said rapidly, her mind racing, recalling the red ledger she had memorized. "You frequent the Blackwood Club in London. You have debts to the tune of £12,000. "So what?" Vaughan scoffed. "Once I have the dukedom, that's pocket change." "But you don't have the dukedom yet," Beatrice hissed. "And I know about the promissory notes you forged. I saw the correspondence in the archives. You forged the late Duke's signature to secure a loan in 1887. That is fraud. That is a prison sentence. 10 years hard labor." It was a bluff, a massive, terrifying bluff. She had seen mentions of loans, and she suspected forgery based on the shaky handwriting. But she had no proof. Vaughan froze. His hand paused inside his jacket pocket. "You're lying," he whispered. "Try me," Beatrice challenged, her eyes hard as flint. "Bring out your paper. I will send a telegram to the London police tonight. Who will they believe? The Wolf of Westminster and his meticulous records, or a desperate gambler with a history of deceit?" Beatrice leaned in, channeling every ounce of Samuel's arrogance she had absorbed over the last few weeks. "Walk away, Mr. Vaughan. Walk away, or you leave this house in chains." Vaughan looked at Samuel, who was watching Beatrice with an expression of utter shock and awe. Then he looked back at Beatrice. He saw the steel in her eyes. He didn't know she was bluffing. He couldn't take the risk. Slowly, Vaughan removed his hand from his pocket. "Empty. This isn't over, Samuel," Vaughan spat. "Keep the seat warm." He turned and stormed out of the ballroom, pushing past the confused guests. The music started up again, hesitant at first, then louder. The crowd, realizing the drama was over, returned to their gossip, though hundreds of eyes remained fixed on the trio. Samuel grabbed Beatrice's arm and practically dragged her through the French doors onto the balcony, into the cold night air. He pulled her into the shadows, away from the prying eyes. He was breathing hard, his composure shattered. "You lied," he said, staring at her. "There was no forged note. You made it up." "I improvised," Beatrice corrected, her knees finally shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "I noticed his cufflinks were paste, not diamond. He's desperate for money now, not later. Desperate men take shortcuts." Samuel stared at her for a long moment. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. "You saved me," he said, sounding as if he couldn't quite believe it. "You saved the estate. You saved Leo." "I just bought us time," Beatrice said, shivering in the cold. "He will come back." "Let him come," Samuel said fiercely. He stepped closer, blocking the wind with his body. He looked down at her, and this time there was no hesitation, no mask. There was only the raw, intense heat of a man looking at the woman who had just fought a dragon for him. "You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever met, Beatrice Halloway." He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing her jawline. Beatrice's breath hitched. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch. "Samuel," she whispered. He lowered his head. His lips brushed hers. Tentative at first, a question. When she didn't retreat, he kissed her. It wasn't a polite society kiss. It was desperate and consuming, fueled by weeks of suppressed tension and the adrenaline of the night. It was a kiss that promised ruin and salvation in equal measure. Beatrice wound her arms around his neck, the velvet of her dress crushing against his formal coat. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the invisible spinster. She was the center of the world. But as they broke apart, breathless, a shadow moved in the garden below the balcony. A figure watched them. It wasn't Vaughan. It was a woman in a grey cloak, standing perfectly still in the rain. As Beatrice looked over Samuel's shoulder, the woman looked up. Beatrice gasped, pulling away from Samuel. "What is it?" Samuel asked, turning around. But the garden was empty. I thought I saw someone," Beatrice stammered. "It's just the shadows," Samuel said, pulling her back toward him. "Forget them." But Beatrice couldn't, because in the brief flash of light from the ballroom window, she had seen the woman's face. It was the woman from the portrait in the East Wing. It was Frederick's wife, the mother of the boy. The woman, Samuel said, had died 6 years ago. Beatrice pulled away from Samuel's embrace, the romance shattering instantly. "I saw her, Samuel, in the garden. A woman who looks exactly like Frederick's wife." Before Samuel could argue, the stablemaster pounded on the manor doors. "Your Grace, a woman is in the stables. She claims to be the Duchess." They sprinted through the rain. Huddled in a horse stall, shivering and gaunt, was Clara Sterling. She wasn't dead. She had been a prisoner. "Vaughan kept me in a cellar in Liverpool," Clara rasped, clutching Beatrice's shawl. "He told me my son died in childbirth. He told me you ordered it, Samuel." "He played us all," Samuel realized, his face pale with fury. "He kept you hidden to blackmail me, and told me you were dead to keep me from searching." Clara grabbed Samuel's arm. "I escaped 2 days ago. But Vaughan knows he isn't coming to blackmail you anymore, Samuel. He's coming to kill you and take the boy. His men are an hour behind me." Samuel turned, his eyes dark. "I'm getting my pistol." "No," Beatrice blocked his path. "He has a gang. You can't fight them alone. But we have something they don't." She looked at the towering shelves of the manor. "We have the archives." An hour later, the power to Ashcroft Manor was cut. The house became a tomb of silence. When Clement Vaughan kicked open the front doors, followed by 3 armed thugs, he found only darkness. "Find them!" he screamed. "Burn it down if you have to!" Vaughan, carrying a lantern, headed straight for the archives, seeking the safe. He pushed open the heavy doors. The room was a canyon of shadows. "You're trespassing, Clement," Samuel's voice echoed from the balcony, cool and detached. "Come out!" Vaughan fired a shot blindly into the ceiling. "Over here," Beatrice whispered from the ground floor maze. Vaughan spun around, stepping deeper into the stacks. "The little librarian, I'll make this quick." He didn't know the terrain. Beatrice did. She knew every loose floorboard and structural weakness. Vaughan stepped onto a wooden slat Beatrice had marked days ago. It gave way. Simultaneously, a heavy counterweight rope, rigged by Beatrice and Thomas, snapped tight around Vaughan's ankle. He was yanked into the air, screaming, dangling upside down as his gun skittered across the floor. A match flared. Beatrice stood there, calm and terrifying. Beside her was Samuel, and stepping from the shadows was Clara. Vaughan stopped thrashing, staring at the dead woman. You have something of mine," Clara said coldly. She reached into his inverted jacket pocket and retrieved the original marriage certificate. "The police are already here, Clement," Samuel said, gesturing to the flashing lights now visible through the window. "Beatrice sent the telegram an hour ago. Kidnapping, fraud, attempted murder, it's a life sentence." Vaughan swung helplessly in the dark, defeated not by a gun, but by a loose floorboard and the smartest woman in England. 3 months later, the gloom of winter had vanished from Yorkshire. Beatrice stood in the sunlit archives, finalizing the catalogue of 17th-century maps. The debts were paid. Leo was legally recognized as the Duke, with Samuel as his regent. The war was over. Her contract was up. The door opened and Samuel walked in. He wasn't wearing his armor of arrogance anymore. He looked nervous. "You missed lunch," he said. "I was finishing my work," Beatrice replied, keeping her eyes on the ledger to hide her sadness. "I suppose my employment is officially terminated?" "Yes," Samuel said, stepping closer. "I'm terminating your position as secretary, because I have a different opening, one that is permanent." He placed a small velvet box on the desk. Inside sat a sapphire ring, dark as the midnight dress she had worn to the ball. "I don't need a secretary, Beatrice," Samuel said, dropping to one knee. "I need a partner. I need someone who isn't afraid of the dark, or of me. Marry me. Not for a debt, but because I cannot breathe in this house without you." Beatrice looked at the man who had once terrified her, finding only love in his grey eyes. She picked up her pen, opened the ledger to a blank page, and wrote, "March 12th, 1889. Agreement between Samuel Sterling and Beatrice Halloway. Terms, lifetime partnership, non-negotiable." She turned the book to him. "I accept the terms." Samuel laughed, a sound of pure joy, and pulled her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of adventures. And that, my friends, is how Beatrice Halloway went from a terrified girl at a dinner table to the Duchess Regent of Ashcroft. She didn't just save her family, she saved the Duke from himself. Vaughan is rotting in prison, Clara is raising the future Duke, and Samuel and Beatrice? Well, let's just say the archives are no longer the only room in the manor that sees some action. If you loved this story of power, betrayal, and redemption, please give this video a massive thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And I have a question for you. Did you suspect the sister-in-law was alive, or did that twist catch you off guard? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. I'll be back next week with another saga of historical drama that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching.